This Chapter 1 video will introduce the Analysis Manager block from the Analysis Library. We'll demonstrate how to use this block to create block factors and responses, and we'll also show how to use this block to auto-collect and catalog results from one run to the next. Side note, the term factor is just a fancy word for describing an input variable in your model. Similarly, the term response is just a fancy word for describing an output variable in your model. So we'll look at this model. It doesn't do anything interesting other than to help us learn how to use the Analysis Manager block. Now, before we do that, let's digress just a little bit and describe the quintessential ExtendSim running experience. Okay, so you've built your model to the extent that you now want to press the run button. So you click the run button and your model runs and you think, okay, what just happened? And often you have to go hunting and pecking through different blocks to see what the model did. For example, you might open up a queue and look at the results tab to see the queuing statistics. You might also open up a block like the activity delay block and change an input or a factor from a 2 to say maybe a 3, and then you would click the run button again. So oftentimes there's this experience of having to hunt and peck through the model as you change inputs, click the run button, and then observe some outputs. We have ways to help make this process easier with cloning. For example, you can, in one central location, clone out a notebook. And so the activity 28, activity delay block 28 here, it has some cloned items in here, and the queuing statistics that I showed you here have been cloned out here. So this is a little bit better, right? You can change this to a 4, we can change this to a 4, then we can click the run button and we can see the queuing statistics in the same location as well. But this doesn't scale as well as we would like it to. So if you have a 10,000 block model and you have a few hundred factors or inputs and you have maybe even more responses or results, the cloning becomes a little bit problematic as well. It's better than the hunting and pecking, but maybe it doesn't scale as nicely as you might like it to. The other problem with cloning and with just going into individual blocks is that we just saw some results here. If I click the run button again, we lose the results from the previous run. So there's no automatic collecting of the history of your model runs from one run to the next. Finally, I want to make one quick point about terminology. Okay, so if I click this run button and my inputs are maximum number of items in the activity is 4 and the maximum or the delay for each item is 4, and I click the run button, what have I done? I've actually run a scenario. Now, if I go to the run simulation setup menu and I change this from a 1 to a 2, and then I click the run button, what have I done? Well, I'm running that same scenario twice. And if I go in here and I say, oh, I want to change one of the input values to say from a 4 to a 5, and I click the run button now, what I'm doing is running a new scenario twice again. Okay, so that's a different scenario. Anytime your input values change and you click the run button, you're running a different scenario. You may run that scenario once or many times. So we've identified a couple of potential issues for you as you do analysis with ExtendSim. One, sometimes you may find yourself hunting and pecking through the model to define your inputs and look at the results. Or you take the time to make some clones in your model or in a notebook. But if the model is large, you may not scale. You may not be able to scale those clones in a way that's useful or convenient. And then finally, as you go from one experiment run to another, there's no automatic cataloging of the history of those results. So at this point, we hope what you'll come to find is that the analysis manager block in the analysis library helps to address, in some capacity, those issues. This analysis manager block works tightly with the analysis database. In fact, when I drop this analysis manager block into the model, you'll notice that it auto creates the analysis database for you. Taking a look at the analysis database, you'll see a bunch of tables have been created. And for this video, we'll start by looking at two tables. One is the block factors table, and the second one is the block responses table. And so every record in this table represents a different block factor. Similarly, every record in this block responses table represents a different response. So then the question becomes, how do we fill this table out? Well, one way to do it is to keep hunting and pecking through your model at least one time. So if we go into this activity delay, and we say, okay, I'm going to right click on the max items in the activity, I can add that as a factor, and you'll see that we automatically add a record to this table. If I were to say, go to the results tab of this activity and say, on the average weight, add a response, then we would automatically get a record in the block responses table. Now, if we go look inside the dialog of the analysis manager block, you'll see that the factor that we added is represented here in the block, and the same with the response as well. Going back to the block factors tab, what I'm going to do though is show you a way to maybe add a bunch of factors all at once without having to hunt and peck through your model. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this factor, okay? And then I'm going to click the search model button, and this will call up the search blocks block from the utilities library. This is a new block for the 2024 R1 release. And what I want to do is I want to search all the activities in the model. And once I've identified them, I want to look at a particular parameter that exists, a dialog parameter that exists in the activity blocks. And what I really want for now is I want the weight delta dialog item, okay? And then when I click the create block list, I get a list of the activity delay blocks in the model, and we're now pointing to block 28 and block 48 and the weight delta parameter. And then I can just click the add factors button here. And you'll see that now instead of having to go into each individual activity delay block, we've just automatically added the weight delta for both activity blocks in this model. Similarly, I'm going to go to the block responses tab. I'm going to delete this response, and I'm going to do a search again, and I'm going to stay in the activity, and this time I want to add from the results tab the average weight. Okay, so we've picked average weight, we've got our list. We're going to create this block list again. And now we're going to add as responses. Now you can see we automatically get two responses for the average weight for both activity delay blocks, and they show up here in the dialog of the analysis manager block as well. Now that we've set up our factors and responses, we're almost ready to click the run button. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is go back to the factors tab and just change the values for the weight delta for both the activity delay blocks. So I'll make this a 2 and I'll make this a 4. I'll swap the values. Okay. And what's going to happen is when I click the run button here, before the model actually starts, the analysis manager will update the input values in these two activity delay blocks. The model will then progress, will proceed, and then at the end of the run, based on the responses that we've defined here, the analysis manager block will collect the results at the end of each run and put them in the analysis database. Okay, so let's give this a try. We're going to click the run button. We're going to do 2 of our runs here, right? And just to verify, let's go back to this. We said activity block 28 should have a delay value of 2 and activity 48 should have a delay value of 4. Let's see if that happened. Go to this, and yeah, here's a 2 and here's a 4. Great. So remember I said we were going to, at the end of the runs, send the response information, copy the response information into the analysis database. And if we look here, we actually have more tables. Okay, let's hide some of these. The results that we've collected actually get stored in database tables that begin with the prefix _RSLT. Now we could go into the database viewer, open up all these database tables and look at the results there. But the analysis manager has an interface that hopefully packages these results for you in maybe an easier way. So let's go to the results tab. The first thing you'll notice is that we have an experiment history table. Okay, and every time we click the run button, we get another record in this experiment history table. So let's do that right now. Let's run this model again. And you'll see now we have 2 experiments cataloged in the analysis database here. And each experiment has a unique ID. We also get the name of the model that was run. We get a start date and time for when we started this experiment. We also get a duration for how long the experiment took to execute. And then finally, we see how many replications we made in that experiment. And let's look at the next table that we get. We have a replication history table. So each record is a replication, in this case, across all the experiments we've run. So you'll notice that the experiment IDs were carried forward. This replication ID is a unique ID for every replication that you run across all the experiments that you've historically run. You also get to see that what the random seed was for each replication. Here's the run number for a particular experiment, right? So for experiment 1, we did 2 replications, so run number 0 and 1, and then the same for the second experiment that we ran. You also get to see when each replication started, a date time, and then a duration for each replication. What else do we have in this results tab? We can now look at the block responses. So we defined, if you look over here, we defined 2 responses. It was the average weight for items in both blocks, right? Okay, so if we go back to results, we can see that we have a commensurate wait time of 2 and 4 for each activity in each replication from experiment 1 and then from experiment 2. We can also filter this list by saying, I only want to see results from the second experiment. So then this list gets filtered. What other tables do we have? We didn't define any database cell responses. We'll do that in the chapter 2 video. So we'll be able to look at that in chapter 2. But we can look at something also here called the response composite. And I think the best way to look at this table is to actually open it up in the database viewer. And what you can see here is that we are looking at the two replications we did in experiment 2. And what you see is we see the random seed and the start time and the duration. But we also, in these subsequent fields, have a list of all the factors and then the subsequent responses. So you can see here, the nomenclature is, we are looking at the input values for block factor 1, block 28, and that's the activity weight delta. And we use the number 2 in both replications. This is also block factor 2 for activity block 48 for the weight delta, and we had used the number 4. And then the last two fields here are block response 1 for activity block 28, the average weight, and then also for activity block 48. So this is a very nice compressed way to see, given the input values, what were the responses. Okay, so let's go back to the experiment history view. You'll notice there's a select column here. And when we select one or more records in this table, we have the option to delete all the data from any experiment that we've checked the box here for. We also have the option to export the results. So let's go ahead and export the results from these two experiments. You know what, let's just do experiment 2 here, okay? Let's export the results from this experiment to text file. So we click the export button, and the question then is, well, where did those text files go? Where they go is in a subfolder in the same directory that your model is located. In this case, we're looking at video.mox. Here's video.mox on my machine, and we auto-created with the analysis manager block. It auto-created an analysis manager results